Titan of Mediation, an interview with Dr. Bernie Mayer, part of the series, Manousso Musing, with seasoned mediator trainer, Dr. Barbara Sunderland Manousso. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hi, everyone. This is Attorney Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney mediator and arbitrator working throughout Houston, Texas, and Florida.
And Natalia Ołowska-Czajka, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland, but this time from Houston, Texas.
And I'm Dr. Barbara Manousso in Houston, Texas, and Newport, Rhode Island. So I'm very happy to see everybody today and to have as our special guest, Dr. Bernie Mayer. And Dr. Mayer is really a titan in the mediation community. He's been well received for all the books that he's written. He's been a professor emeritus at the Werner Institute at Creighton University. He's been a leader, as I said, in the field of conflict resolution for over 35 years, and a trainer working internationally, working locally. He helps with the substance abuse treatment and psychotherapy, mental health, child welfare. He has a very broad base of knowledge, and we're just tickled today to have Dr. Mayer as our guest. And he's here to talk about his latest book, The Neutrality Trap. So Dr. Mayer, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You have written 7 books, and they have all had staying power. They're all books that are part of curriculum for anybody that is a theorist or a student of conflict management and resolution. And this program is dedicated to mediation, which of course is under the umbrella of that. And you've done the dynamics of conflict, beyond neutrality, staying with conflict. And your last book, The Conflict Paradox, 7 Dilemmas at the Core of Disputes, all well received. And now you have chosen to co-author the book, The Neutrality Trap, Disrupting and Connecting for Social Change, which of course is a huge problem right now. So, Bernie, would you tell us a little bit about what inspired you? We know that everything's been in chaos politically, but we don't want to be political. We want to keep this toward the mediation perspective. But tell us some of the burning ideas that you had that you felt compelled that needed to be put into print in this neutrality trap.
Well, it's hard not to be a little political because I think the line between what's political and what's just trying to help people solve problems can be fuzzy. But I was inspired to write this after the murder of George Floyd. And I had been thinking for quite a while before that, that the response that the mediation and conflict and peacemaking communities have to serious social conflicts is often to say, well, we just need to help people listen to each other and bring them together to dialogue and to talk. And that was a response after the upset after George Floyd. That was a response after the 2016 election of Donald Trump. There was somewhat of a response we had like that in Canada to the truckers blockaded the bridges of Ottawa in the last couple of weeks. And we can come up with a lot of other examples of that. And I felt like, listening and bringing people together to talk is a good thing, but that's in isolation of an understanding of the need to build social movements and the need to understand the power differentials that are at play here. The instinctive reaction that we should have dialogue and bring people together is inadequate. It's only half the story. And if you only tell half the story without the other half, then just bringing people together can actually be a way of maintaining the status quo. There has to be also a commitment to social change, to building the movements that it takes to confront racism or misogyny or the exploitation of our resources, and not just to having people talk. You need both. And so that's what inspired me to write it. And the concept, or on a conceptual maybe level, is we have systems that perpetuate the status quo, an unhealthy status quo, and those systems need to be disrupted. Because the way systems change is that disruption occurs and forces systems to reorganize. So that's why the title of the book is Disrupting and Connecting for Social Change.
Wow. Natalie, you look like you had something to ask.
Oh yes, because I'm absolutely inspired by what you've been doing. We know that there is a co-author of the book, Dr. Jacqueline Font-Guzman, and we wanted to ask you how this entire cooperation went and what this cooperation together brought to this entire project.
Between Jackie and me, you talk?
Yes.
Oh, well, it went very well. So Jackie and I worked together for 14 years at Creighton. She's now at Eastern Mennonite University, as I think you know. But we were colleagues in the negotiation and conflict resolution program at Creighton. And we talked about a lot of these issues over the years. We kind of commented and gave feedback to each other on our separate writings. And quite frankly, we were through some pretty difficult academic conflicts where we were allies with each other and saw things in a pretty synchronous way. So that was a reason I thought she and I could work together very well on this. But also, I thought that this was a kind of topic that needed a diversity of input, not just to be blunt, a older white guy talking about social change. It needed different perspectives, and Jackie certainly brought that to the table. So I was delighted when she agreed to write this. But she did before she realized while writing it she was going to have to. She was going to be quitting one job, selling a house, moving across the country, buying another house, starting a new job, and still she really pulled her weight in writing this. And so it was a delight to work for her. And I really did feel like she brought a different perspective that somebody who grew up in the mainstream of U.S. society wouldn't bring. I mean, growing up in Puerto Rico, having the view of what it's like to be in a colony and to be viewed as a outsider in many circumstances, etc., made an enormous difference.
Dr. Mayer, so when people hear the word mediator, they think of some buzzwords, right? Like impartiality, neutrality, confidentiality. So was the book title meant to shock, or was it meant to just be persuasive in of itself to different audience segments? How do you reconcile the need for mediators to be neutral with the title of your book?
Well, I've actually written quite a bit about this previously. The previous book I wrote was called Beyond Neutrality, for example. And I've written about the concept of neutrality. I wasn't trying to shock. I did want to get people's attention. We did want to get people's attention. But, and it wasn't written just for mediators. It was written for people in general who are trying to deal with conflict and deal as peacemakers and who are interested in constructive approaches to social change. But let's just talk about it for the point of view for mediators for a while. I think the concept of neutrality has been a trap. It is a very misleading concept. it means something different to everybody. There are many different kinds of ways you can consider neutrality. None of us are really totally neutral or impartial. And I don't think people expect us to be. I think people want us to be fair, if you want to call it that. They want us to be transparent about who we are and what our connections or biases might be. They don't want us to be intentionally and deceptively pushing one set of interests of parties over another. But I also think they want us to be really engaged and involved, to bring our whole selves to the table, to be really committed to having a constructive interchange happening. And that's why I think we have intermediaries, why we have always had them in one way or another. The neutrality thing is more a way of self-identification, of saying that's who we are as opposed to something else. But I see myself, and I've long thought myself as a conflict intervention professional. And in one of the roles I play is to help other people come together. And so I think the trap is when we're dealing on issues such as oppression or racism or misogyny or whatever you want to consider, the trap is that we have to stay completely even-handed and uninvolved about the power differentials and the rights and wrongs involved. And so I don't think that's right. I think it makes us be less effective. I think we can say we are committed to ending racism. We are committing to having a different kind of policing happen, and we can still help police and communities talk together. But if all we say is we're neutral of bringing people together, almost inevitably that will lead us to a kind of support of the status quo. So maybe that's a long answer to a question. I think what mediators do is very important. And I think helping people talk is very important. It's just not the whole story about how social change happens.
You bring out an interesting point, Dr. Mayer, and we're delighted you as the co-author of the Neutrality Trap addressing this not just from the perspective of a closed room with maybe two people that are mediating, but also the opportunity that the concept is expanded to society at large, and the two people who might be in a room doing the mediation are microscopic representation of the larger society. With that being said, you alluded to the concept of we all have different perspectives of what neutrality is, and also what the traps are. And you mentioned the traps. What are some of the traps that you feel, maybe give one example of some way of getting out of a trap? If we're playing golf, we would have an idea of how the stance would be and how you'd get out of the sand trap. And so these are, again, generic terms, but what could you give an example of something concrete that would be a process that could be moved forward to help people move from just their own biases and their own insulated bubble to really moving it and making something happen? What could you, maybe not something that's already happened, but something you would like to see, maybe a wish list of a very realistic project?
Well, this isn't a new issue for mediators. So, for example, in family mediation, are we neutral when we are helping a divorce negotiation occur between somebody who is a victim of domestic violence and the person who's the perpetrator of it? Or in child protection mediation, if we are dealing with a a family member who is a parent who's had a neglect charge made against them, and they're trying to work out an intervention agreement, and they're arrayed against all these professionals in a very alien setting. Are we neutral? Do we not say, no, we have to do something to create a more empowered person here, or do we not have to do something to protect the person who is a victim of domestic violence? Or if we're dealing with a community group that is struggling against a huge corporation who's trying to build a mine and that's going to affect our groundwater, are we just going to say, well, let's help you all talk together, or not? Or do we not realize that if the community group's not empowered to be able to have a more powerful voice and the support they need to have a more powerful voice, then we're just sort of conducting a process that's going to railroad them. And I've been part of a lot of situations where, in fact, I've had to say, well, something was racist, for example. What just happened was racist, and we can't have it. And I'm not just having people listen and understand each other. I think we all know that. And I might want to. I want to add something else here. It's a slightly different point, but I think it's related. I also think conflict professionals and people who have been in third-party roles have a lot to offer to activists. It's not just that we have to, learn from them and make sure that we don't get in their way. We have something to really offer them. I mean, in terms of our experience with conflict, our ability to understand the power dynamics, the cultural dynamics, where different people are coming from. I think those are all things that we do that aren't just, I'm going to act as if I have an even playing field here. If power is balanced, I don't have to deal with power dynamics. I can give you specific practice examples from my own work if you want, but those are some examples which I think many of us are familiar with.
Could you give us one or two of a project that you've done? What were some of the building blocks to move beyond this neutrality trap? Because we all kind of see what the trap is, and you're right, it means different things to different people, different times. But what would be, and everybody wants to read your book, The Neutrality Trap, so they need to go and read more of the detail. But maybe you could just provide us with a couple building blocks of something that was workable, that moved people forward.
Well, I think one thing is to be willing to call out things that, or as Jackie likes to say, call in things that are difficult. So an example I think of is being involved in wasn't exactly a mediation, but it was a dialogue process between, in Eastern Europe actually, between people who are part of social agencies on a municipal level and minority groups, in this case, particularly Turkish and Roman minority groups, who were pretty seriously being discriminated against. And at some point, I heard some of this was through translation, but I heard some really racist comments made towards Romas. And I was sitting there, and I wasn't exactly immediate, but I was part of a process of doing it. And I was thinking, all right, I cannot just let this happen. So I said, that's racist. And that's exactly what we're dealing with here. We've got to figure out how to get past that. But that kind of comment does not help bring people in, does not help deal with it. And I thought I might be kicked out of the room here. This might be the end of the project. I might be asked to go home. But I thought the consequence of not saying anything would have been terrible. And in fact, much to my surprise, it opened up the conversation. And we had a much different kind of talk there, at dinner, in the future. And it was like we could say things like that. And I think we often can do that more than we think. And I've been in similar circumstances in North America as well. That's just one that stands out for me. A circumstance where I wished I'd done it but I did not, and in retrospect, it was a mistake. Had to do with a group of environmentalists in a I have to maintain confidentiality here, so I'm going to be general. Environmentalists against developers on a project, and we had been led to believe that the developers really wanted to work out something that would work for the environmentalists that are involved, maybe setting aside and preserving a certain acreage and whatever. And we went through and convinced on that basis the environmentalists to participate, and we went through a process. And we've been led down a primrose path. The developers were just trying to create a circumstance in which they could say that they really tried to work this out, but they couldn't, so they just went ahead. And they didn't offer anything but saying, we'll take your concerns into consideration in the future. And I had to deliver this message to environmentalists. And what I basically said is that, that's what they're going to do. And they said, is that it? And I said something like, I'm afraid so. And they were furious. And said, how could you let this happen? How could you bring us into this? And they basically left. And I thought afterwards, why didn't I just say, look, I'm really sorry we let you into this. You were taken advantage of, and we were played. And that's what happened. Why couldn't I have said that? Because, in fact, I think it would have helped the situation in many ways. But I had to be neutral. I couldn't step out of that.
In what transpires from your book is that we shouldn't be necessarily avoiding conflicts. We should be engaging in them. And this is only when you can realize what sort of issue there is on the table and how to deal with that. And I understand that this is one of the mechanisms that is to bring the social change. And what social change do you mean in the micro scale and in the macro scale? What were you actually wanting to inspire with your book?
All right. I want to make sure, what sort of social change am I looking for in those macro and micro scale? Except I said it backwards, macro and micro scale. I just want to say, I definitely believe that our role is to help people have the conflict they need to have. That a lot of times, what needs to occur is you often have to up the level of conflict sometimes, hopefully within constructive parameters, but still that's often what's necessary. And in an earlier book, Staying with Conflict, I talked about the fact that by being so focused on resolving conflict, we often let the longer term, deeper issues that are going to go on forever fester, and we don't deal with them. So an example, I think, of a micro issue might be in an organization where we're brought in maybe because there's a grievance about hiring processes, where the real problem that people are that's behind the grievances is a really hostile working environment or a bullying working environment. And sometimes to get to that, you really have to up the ante, because we might be able to solve agreements, to mediate agreements, and never touch what the real issue is. So, that might be a micro example. On a macro example, if we want to look, for example, at the issues of police-community relations, as came out after the George Floyd murders in Minnesota in 2020, I think we might be able to work out some specific things about processes for feedback between police and communities would be good. On a larger level, we really need to rethink policing in this country, because the issue of the differential treatment of minorities on all levels is appalling. It's just and it has to do with the levels of incarceration, differential ways in which people are stopped, how they are dealt with when they're stopped. It's really a major problem. And unless we look at that and how it's based in more generalized systems of policing and justice and the assumptions therein, we aren't going to be dealing with the real problem. Does that answer your question? Okay.
And with that, Dr. Mayer, we're going to wrap it up, but we're going to come back for a part 2 soon enough with your co-host, Dr. Jackie Font-Guzman. So, all right, everyone, stay tuned. Until next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.